What's happening, YouTube? This is John, nerding out with cards. And like I said in my previous video, I am really excited to do this one, right? So if you remember from way back in my intro, hey, I'm getting on the YouTube video, I said there was two players that are not Cardinals, that don't have ties to St. Louis, that I actually do collect. You're thinking, well, dude, I've watched some of your videos and it seems kind of weird that you collect something not St. Louis. Well, there's a reason why, right? And, there's reasons why people collect players that aren't on their favorite teams, this, that, whatever, right? It could be because of, just how great they are, their ethnicity, religion, exploits, war heroes. I want to do a special shout out to Jay, Average Vintage Collector. He's doing that series on the Battle of the Bulge veterans, and I think that is phenomenal. I love it. I can't wait to see more. But, so for me, that's why I shout out his channel, right? Because it's kind of all the same thing, Chief Petty Officer Bob Feller. And if you've seen me comment on anybody's videos where they're talking about Bob Feller, I always say, Chief Feller, Chief Petty Officer Feller, CPO Feller, and that's just because I think that's just the respect that he deserves, right? Because he is a Chief Petty Officer. I think the Navy in the Cleveland area does like a Bob Feller Valor Award that they give to sailors, which is great. So, but why is that important to me? So I, as you may or may not know, I'm in the Coast Guard, right? And I am a Chief Petty Officer. For those unfamiliar with military ranks and stuff like that, E7 is Chief, Senior Chief is E8, Master Chief is E9. The Coast Guard very much mirrors the Navy, right? The other branches have different terms for those pay grades, but for the Navy and for the Coast Guard, Chief Petty Officer, right? And my dad's a Navy chief, my uncle's a Navy Master Chief. The Chief's Mess is very important to me, and I'll show a little bit of that later on in the video. But challenge coins are a thing. So when I made Chief back in 2016, went through the initiation process and coin carrying member, Chief Petty Officer. So Bob Feller, like I said, I'm a chief, family's full of chiefs, and Bob Feller's a chief. So when I made Chief, he was, that's when I really learned of Bob Feller and what he was. And so that really kind of got me intrigued, and I learned more about him, read some books, and I'll show some of those. Here's a biography on Bob Feller. It's got pictures of him enlisting, like right after the bombing of Pearl Harbor. This is a pretty famous photo that I'm sure you may have seen. Whenever you hear Bob Feller, he's referred to as a gun captain, which is more just like a collateral duty billet kind of thing. But his pay grade was chief. So this book's phenomenal. I highly recommend you read this book. The game must go on. Now, the major characters of the book is Hank Greenberg and Pete Gray. Very intriguing story. But, it talks about baseball all through the war, the Cardinals being what I describe as America's team. People kind of like, poo-poo on the quality of baseball during the war and everything like that, and kind of dismiss some of the achievements and everything. But if you read this book, how important it was that baseball was being played during that time, it's phenomenal stuff. But, it does talk about Bob Feller. How could it not? Got that picture again, him playing baseball. That was at 1945 at the training center in the Great Lakes area. Him enlisting. There's a picture of Greenberg enlisting too. But phenomenal book. Highly recommend you read it. So here's another book. This is freaking sweet. It's the War Diaries of the USS Alabama. And, you know, it's got just tremendous, tremendous stuff. You know, you look at this, it shows everywhere the USS Alabama traveled during the war. Insane, insane. You know, it talks about the beginning of the book, like they traveled 175,000 nautical miles. I mean, in the last 2 years, I've traveled about 50,000 nautical miles. That's just an insane total. And what stuck out to me, let me see if I can get it here. So, you know, yeah, they traveled up in the Arctic. I've never been there, but, you know, crossed the Panama Canal. Back in 2019, I got to go through the Panama Canal. My dad's been through the Panama Canal. My grandfather back in World War II went through the Panama Canal. I think it's just so damn sweet. Well, this line right here, very important line, if you ask me, because that's the equator. And I've crossed the equator several times now, but those of y'all may know, you know, for sailors and whatnot, that's a big deal. That's when you become a shellback, you know. And then you got the international date line where you enter the realm of the Golden Dragon. You know, I've crossed that a handful of times. As a matter of fact, I crossed the equator and the international date line at the same time. That's what makes me a golden shellback. But it's really cool, you know, and, you know, they put in the page here, you know, the different certificates that sailors receive when they do that kind of stuff. Mine are back home. I don't have them hung up, but, you know, so it's really cool. You know, like Bob Feller is a sailor. He's a chief. He's a shellback. You know, these things that I am too. And that's what really kind of drove me to Bob Feller. I'll show you a couple more things. You know, here's a page in the book. You know, it's where, you know, he's acting as a gun captain. This page is really cool, you know, so like during port calls or maintenance availabilities, you know, they would do some like R&R kind of thing. Well, the USS Alabama had a baseball team. That's Bob Feller. So, you know, the caption, it says that he's hitting a home run. And then here's their baseball team, and that's Bob Feller right there. You know, it's really just cool documentation of Bob Feller's time in the war. You know, and kind of before I go any further, why don't I show you some baseball cards, right? We all love to look at baseball cards. And I've only got some, right? You know, there's, you know, his Gaudy big head. I really do want that. You know, the Gaudy wide pen, I believe it's called. That's really cool. The 1941 double play. I think that'd be amazing, right? Because that's a pre-war card, like right before the war. So I think that would be an amazing card to get. And then his 48 Bowman, you know, it's a pretty iconic card. But I don't have any of those. But the ones I do have are because I love the images on the card. So without further ado, you know, I'm going to show you chronological order. You might have seen this before. My 1950 Bob Feller. This is just my favorite image of Bob Feller's cards. You know, I like the artistic design of it. You know, he's going into his windup. Just really cool card. And what's neat about these, you know, it does refer to his time in the Navy on the back of these cards. Really sweet stuff. You got the 1953 tops. You know, just iconic image. It's been used on several of his cards. The 1953 design is timeless. You know, Topps just keeps recycling. The 1953 design is, I mean, it's a standard for their living set that they do now. This one I just think is really cool. I like this set. The 55 Bowman. You know, it's the unfortunate last year of Bowman in that incarnation anyway. But, you know, it's kind of neat. And you've heard people talk about it before, but, you know, like TVs were a big deal at that time. So I just think it just kind of, you know, it's got its, you know, timestamp or something, you know, just its moment in history. But that image of Bob Feller is great. You know, he's got his fastball grip on the ball. And then this one I just think is phenomenal. Dan, he just did a video with a 1956 collector. They talked about all the great things of this set. It's the last year of that card size as a standard. Last year of the artistic design, but it's really cool because it's got the portrait. It's got Bob Feller getting ready to deliver a pitch. Well, what's also significant about this card is it's also his last playing days card. And you get to read, all the final stats. He ended up with 266 wins. Could have had 300. But his time in the war, he didn't. But reading his biography, he wouldn't trade his time becoming what I believe to be a hero for that statistical milestone, which good on him. But it's great stuff. If you remember, he led the league in strikeouts and things like that leading up to the war. He comes back from the war after all that time off and leading the league in strikeouts again. One time he had the most strikeouts in a game record. He had the no-hit record that's since been passed by a couple people, of course, Sandy Koufax, Nolan Ryan, and things like that. But yeah, just, I don't think I'm going to go nuts on Bob Feller, but at the same time, it's just one of those really cool, fun collections I have that has a deeper connection, a deeper meaning to me, right? I like to show this one again. I saw this on the eBay. This is given out in Cooperstown at like a Hall of Fame game or something. I'm not sure what year, but what I really, really dig about this card, he's wearing his Chief uniform. It used to be, I don't think it's the case anymore, but the combo cover, that's what we call that, was only worn by E7 and above. So that's a really like dead giveaway, along with the anchor on the cover. So, but yeah, just absolutely love it. And I've loved learning more about Bob Feller. Yeah, his exploits on the field, but then learning more about his naval career. Enlisting, like he was in a car in Iowa during the off season, heard about the bombing, went straight to the recruiting office and enlisted, no questions asked. They tried to assign him to, be like a PE instructor or something of the sort. He said, no, screw that. I want to do, real man things, or whatever you want to call it. Gets assigned to USS Alabama, and they endured some stuff. There was Japanese attacks, there was this, there's that. And that's not even to mention the normal stuff that you have to deal with underway, right? The heavy seas, the maintaining and operating equipment, just the food. Ooh, don't get me started on the food. And it really gets heavy into some of that. You get to see a lot of that in this book. It's phenomenal to pick this up. The last picture I wanted to show from this, and this kind of ties into the last few cards, ties into all this, is here, right? So that's the Chief Petty Officers of the USS Alabama. And right there, really hard to see, but that's Bob Feller, Chief Bob Feller. Like I said, when I made Chief, that was a huge accomplishment. That was my career goal, was to make Chief. And I joke around on the boat, and Navy guys, maybe some of the Marines that happen to watch this might know, but I always say there's three kinds of people in this world. There's chiefs, right? There's wannabe chiefs, right? That's the E6 and below. And then there's the people who couldn't handle being a chief. Some knew it right away. They went to the academy or something of the sort. And then there's the people who realized that doing the job, they couldn't handle it. Threw the anchor away, called those warrant officers. But anyway, joking aside, like I said, I absolutely love being a chief. It's hard. I take a lot of pride in it. But You know, like I said, the Chiefs mess, I just love it. And, you know, so especially being on the ship that I'm on now, you know, like I said, we're underway forever. And then, you know, we go through this dry dock and things like that. But, you know, my family lives in the St. Louis area. And then I'm just on the cutter when I'm at the ship, right? And well, there's several of us that are enduring that lifestyle. They call us geo bachelors, and so a bunch of us, you know, we just kind of like banded together. And so, you know, me being the big baseball guy, I've kind of pushed us to go to some games. But you know, it's like I said, you've seen me do this before, but you know, like fun way to have, you know, good time with cards. Like last year, we went to a game in Oakland. Luckily, we did because, well, they don't play in Oakland anymore, and Sacramento's a hike, you know. But yeah, there's me, along with some of the Chiefs in the mess. You know, I value my time working with them. You know, we've endured some hard times, endured some great times. You know, so you know, we went to a game in San Francisco last year. So you know, I like to get these stadium cards, pair it with a picture. But yeah, there's, you know, a bunch of the Chiefs I work with, except for that guy, that Dodger fan. You know, he's all about the money. He threw the anchor away. But if any officers in here, I'm just joking. You know, and then home ported in Seattle, so you know, went to a game in Seattle, and again, a bunch of the Chiefs I work with, and they were a bunch of really good sports too, because I had found out where you can meet the Moose in the Moose Den, and so I was like, hey guys, either, you know, after the top half of the second or top half of the seventh, we got to go to the Moose Den. I want to get a picture of us with the Moose. And you know, so we did, but you know, it's just you know, a fun way to talk about, you know, player I collect. That's not the Cardinals, the why, and how it kind of ties into some other fun things I do, some, you know, a little bit about me in a sense. So, you know, if there's a player that has a deeper meaning, a much more of a connection to you, you know, who is that, right? I think I mentioned before, High Pop Professor, Iconic Gal. You know, they had Sean Casey. You know, I see a lot of Jackie collectors for obvious reasons. You know, Sandy Koufax, Hank Greenberg for obvious reasons. Although Hank Greenberg, you know, he covers a lot of bases. But, you know, things like that, you know, is that, you know, maybe they don't play for your favorite team. Maybe you never got to watch them play, right? Like, you know, I never got to watch Bob Feller play. But I'd be interested in to hear, you know, if there's players like this for you and your collection. I do want to give a quick shout out if you're still sticking with me. I understand my videos get a little bit long, but Warren D and CLE and Scott at Reindeer Studios. I know y'all are Indians guys or Guardians, whatever they're called, but you know, Bob Feller's one of your guys. So I hope to get to a ball game in Cleveland just to see the Bob Feller statue. I would just want to do that. Anyway, I hope you all stuck with me. I hope you all really enjoy this, and you all have a good one.